Thousands of years before the first stock market crashed, in centuries before the first democracy fell, a warning was written down. It didn't predict a specific war. It didn't name a specific president or king. Instead, it described a mathematical pattern, a repeating sequence of events that explains exactly why societies rise, why power concentrates, and why civilizations eventually commit suicide. We often think we have outgrown ancient wisdom. We look at our smartphones, our satellites, and our global economy, and we assume that because our technology has changed, we have changed. But if you strip away the silicon and the steel, you realize something unsettling. The human operating system, the way we respond to power, fear, and greed, hasn't changed in 10,000 years. There is a text that mapped the mechanics of these systems long ago. We usually read the Bible as a book of faith, but what if we read it as a manual of systems engineering? When you do, the stories stop looking like miracles and start looking like mechanics, and you realize that the pattern it described isn't just history, it is happening right now. Every civilization faces the same existential question. How do you control behavior at scale? When a group is small, say a tribe of 50 people, you don't need complex laws. You have shame and reputation. If you steal from your neighbor, everyone knows and the social cost is immediate. But once a society grows into the millions, that personal connection vanishes. You become a stranger among strangers. At this scale-up point, most societies try to rely on external force. They build higher walls and hire more guards. But there is a flaw in the math of force. It doesn't scale. If you need one guard to watch every 10 citizens, your economy will eventually buckle under the weight of your own security apparatus. You cannot successfully police a million people who do not want to be policed. The Bible proposes a different technology for social order: internalized control. This is the shift from the guard at the gate to the guard in the mind. By establishing a moral framework that exists outside of the government, a code of conduct that a person follows even when no police are watching, you create the most efficient system possible. The Ten Commandments weren't just religious rules. They were a standardized operating system designed to allow a massive population to coexist without needing a soldier on every street corner. Let's look at the systemic efficiency of concepts like sin and conscience. In a purely secular, power-based system, a crime is only a problem if you get caught. This creates a perverse incentive. It encourages citizens to become better at hiding their actions. However, when you introduce a transcendental observer, the idea that an ultimate authority sees the heart and the intent, the cost of enforcement drops to near zero. Consider the biblical obsession with just weights and measures. In the ancient world, trade was often a battle of wits. If the only thing stopping a merchant from cheating you is a government inspector who visits once a year, he will cheat you every other day of the year. But the biblical system emphasizes honesty as a moral requirement. Economists call this social capital. Low trust societies are poor because every transaction requires a lawyer and a contract. High trust societies thrive because a handshake is enough. The Bible was essentially trying to build a high trust engine in a low trust world. It understood that an economy isn't built on money, it is built on the invisible agreement that we will tell the truth to one another. Another pattern the text highlights is legitimacy. Authority only works as long as the population believes it is justified. In the biblical narrative, there was a specific check on power. The king must be subject to the law, not the source of it. The king was required to write a copy of the law by hand and keep it with him so that he would not elevate himself above his people. But the pattern warns that when leaders believe they are exempt from the moral system, when the rules apply to the common man but not the elite, the system begins to leak legitimacy. It doesn't collapse immediately, it erodes. First, the rules become selective. Then, trust weakens. And finally, the government has to return to external force just to hold the nation together. When the internal control at the top fails, the stability at the bottom shatters. We see this final stage of systemic failure described vividly in the last book of the Bible, Revelation. Now, usually when people hear Revelation, they think of end-time predictions. But whether you read this as theology or as ancient economic theory, The structural warning in chapter 18 is clear. The text describes a dominant economic hub, codenamed Babylon, that built its influence on luxury and trade. But notice what happens when it falls. It isn't the religious leaders who are crying, it is the merchants. The text explicitly lists their unsold cargo: gold, silver, linen, oil, and finally, at the very end of the list, human souls. The text critiques a system that reduced even human life to a mere economic unit. It describes a society that became so obsessed with transaction that it forgot transformation. The warning here is structural. It suggests that when a civilization deletes its moral operating system and relies entirely on economic extraction, it becomes fragile. It reaches a tipping point where, as the text says, in 1 hour, the wealth comes to nothing. There is a line often quoted from the Bible: there is nothing new under the sun. From a systems perspective, this isn't pessimism, it is realism. Technology changes, the clothes change, but the incentives, greed, pride, and the desire for control remain exactly the same. The Bible doesn't need to predict the future to remain relevant. It mapped the mechanics of human systems long ago. Understanding those mechanics doesn't require belief, it only requires observation. Because when societies forget how the system actually works, they don't collapse with a bang. They repeat history quietly,